some concepts around. That's right, introduced some concepts around housing targets and tier 1B Act 250 exemptions, so. Since that February meeting, we've done a lot of regional engagement, in terms of having. Our public map viewer up, we took comments on housing targets, we did events across the regions, focus groups. Webinars, we did a lot of engagement with individual municipalities as we. In working with a specific plan with them, but we didn't do anything really direct in Williston at your direction because. They're working on that town plan update, which is moving along swimmingly, and also congrats on passing your bylaw changes. And we also wanted to incorporate all the work you've already done, all the outreach you've already done directly into our regional plan map. And it should look pretty straightforward, and we hope that folks are still feeling good about that. So tonight, what we want to do is, as we are closing down our initial engagement process for this, well, it's really round 2, but it's our more open and direct engagement about this update. We want to confirm the boundaries of the map, and I do have some specific questions about that, as I mentioned. We want to just touch on housing targets briefly and make sure that feels good. And then what we really want to talk about tonight is the tier 1B request.
Yes.
Specifically, does Williston want to have any areas exempt up to 50 units of housing on 10 acres or less? For projects that would otherwise trigger Act 250. That's the crux of the meeting.
And one question I'm hoping can get answered in the process is how many Act 250 projects do we have active that we would have to take over management of for tier 1A for the Taft Corners district?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's an excellent question. Not something I'll probably get into tonight because tier 1A is a separate process.
Okay.
And it's something that the town would apply directly to the land use review board for after the regional plan, around the time that our regional plan is adopted, sometime in June of next year. But we can certainly talk about that and what that would look like.
It looked to me as though we could apply for tier 1B for the center. And not have to take on responsibility for administering the existing Act 250 permits.
Yeah, we will get into that.
Oh,
There's some interesting nuances that we are still figuring out at the Regional Planning Commission.
Thank you for your letter too.
Yes, and sorry that came out late, but it
We got it.
hopefully helps encapsulate some of the things that we want to talk about tonight, put it on paper and guide us through that discussion. So with that,
If I could interrupt you really
Please.
quickly, just so I know how much time we have for conversation, is that 7:50? Are we going over to the select board or?
No, you don't need to. I'll need to go over there actually for
Okay.
8:12. And everything about the town plan that's on there is just an FYI and an electronic home for what we're gonna be talking to the select board about tonight. And I'm basically just saying to them, the planning commission passed the town plan. Here it is, and here's your roadmap forward. So no need to worry about going over time, Darren. This is pretty much your night.
okay,
Right.
well,
Tier
I
one.
don't really take your entire
As much as you want.
We will definitely give it the time it needs. So I'm gonna start by pulling up that map viewer. Just 1 second. You think by this time in my career, I've been really practiced at talking and doing something completely different on my computer.
The map is aesthetically very nice.
Thank you, I'm glad you think so. We did receive a lot of comments across the region about the colors being a little hard to distinguish between planned growth area and village area, and I noticed Chapin, you sort of had a little comment about that, so. The one shortfall of this color scheme, the reason it is what it is because it needs to be on a color ramp and it needs to be readable by folks who have color vision differences, so. We spent a surprising amount of time going back and forth about colors before this went out to the public. So,
There's some changes there from the ones we were just looking at.
yes, and so I want to show a little bit of what's going on at the regional level, so you'll see this. This is the, let's zoom all the way out. Regional level still looks pretty similar to what was on the public facing version of this. You just take off one thing.
What are the pins?
The pins are all of the comments that we received from every individual person who came on here.
Oh. couple in Westford there are mine.
Yeah, and I was happy to follow up with you about this, but I think we've addressed.
There's a ton of comments in Charlotte.
Yes, a majority of those are individual comments saying this is a conserved parcel, please change it to rural conservation, which we are doing.
Okay.
I think all but one comment in Charlotte was related to that, which is a great segue to the thing I wanted to mention first. Thank you, Melinda. So you'll see that when we put this out, we had intended to have anything that is in a legally protected, conserved parcel, either by Vermont Land Trust or a local land trust or some other form of conservation easement or deed restriction in rural conservation, generally speaking. We missed that in our GIS processing, so we're gonna go back and fix all of that. We've done it in most towns. We're still working through all of them. So in Williston, we did make sure to try and get all of those done for tonight. However, one thing that is a little bit of a nuance that we want to confirm with each town is if there are conserved parcels within a planned growth area or some other zone or district that land use area that is intended for more growth and more of an urban context, conserved parcels can have multiple intents and uses. Sometimes they're actually intended for active recreation, for some sort of, community park. Sometimes they're meant to be a more natural resource management area or farm or something like that. So before we did any significant changes, we wanted to confirm that with you. We were pretty clear about the Marshall Blueberry Swamp and the Indian Farm Conservation Area. Those are pretty obvious. But specifically around the village, there are a few parcels that we thought we should ask you about. I think the community park is one that could go either way, and it would also be adjacent to that area of rural conservation that follows Allen Brook. So either way you want to do it is fine. There's the solar field behind us in the town office here in the police station. Seems like that is restricted to non-structured development, but still has the solar panels on it. And then a couple of those parcels on either side of the end of the village. We just wanted to know if there was any particular way those should go.
Which ones are you referring to? The
Well, we'll start at the end of Whitney Hill.
that one, yeah.
Yeah. And then also out towards Johnson Lane at the end of what would be considered at the end of the sewer core. There are a few parcels that we even wondered if it's worth dialing back the planned growth area, even though that's where your sewer core is. And just because if we put those in conservation, it leaves the cemetery and that last parcel kind of hanging out there. But ultimately, our rubric for making these changes to conserved parcels is really about the intended use. If it is intended to remain open and natural and not intensively used, we're gonna try to put it in rural conservation.
So,
And we don't have to sort this all out in this meeting tonight, but if you had, feedback or after that, we can take that in.
the ones that are that are
Cross
east of the line of the whatever, the ones that are to the east,
very lower left there,
very lower left,
and the Whitney Hill and over to the.
yeah, those are both held in conservation easements by VHCB. So I don't know, that might answer the question. And then,
And there are restrictions on the town hall meadow.
yeah, and that one is also held by VHCB.
Yeah, and we saw your comment on that, Chapin. That was part of what sparked us
Okay,
thinking
I don't
about this.
remember what I said about it.
Exactly what you just said.
My house is the pin that's just not dark purple, and I asked about that, but I
Yes.
think the answer
Next
was,
topic.
I'm too far off of Route 2. Even though I'm in the historic register.
Yeah, that is our next topic, so. So it sounds like we will make those ones south of the village center as currently mapped, conservation, rural conservation. And then community park behind the school.
I was gonna ask about that, the part that is, there's two parts crosshatched there.
Mhm.
The lower left one that's at the end of Village Grove, I thought was school property, it's where the track is.
Does that help?
Can someone answer that? I mean, it goes into the disc golf course a little bit, the way it's mapped there, but I thought that was school property and actually thought the school property ran back into the disc golf course, but I didn't know for sure.
I think you might be right about that.
It looks like the school property does go beyond this conserved area,
Yeah.
beyond Allenbrook.
No. Oh, I see what you're looking at there. I don't know about that part. That part on the right, I thought was town property. I
this-
thought, John Lambert conveyed that to the town. for the
Yeah.
soccer
Yeah.
fields. But the stuff to the left of the hedgerow, I thought was school, and I could be wrong.
We do also need to consult Williston's conservation parcels on their town plan maps. I was not able to get that up on the computer for tonight, but we will be looking at that too. So if anything shows up there, it might guide us.
So, I mean, if that is school property, does it change anything?
Not necessarily. We are really looking at legal restrictions as mapped on this layer from the state conserved lands or protected lands databases, and then the local conservation easements that might be in play, so we can call Melinda about.
So you can answer about the soccer fields.
So where are you talking about? Right here?
Yeah,
Are
there any restrictions on that?
not to my knowledge, but yeah, I don't know, but I do know that the one off Lambert Lane, I think there are restrictions on that one. The one that's not marked at all right now.
Yeah, it's not marked to the southeast of what we're talking about. Little
So-
triangle there.
Right here.
Yep.
And then there's a parcel to the north of what's hatched, that is also, well.
It shows it's part of the same parcel on that. It goes across.
Yeah, and then the
to
one
the
above
village.
that one
Yeah,
is also.
oh, yes. Continuing up. Is there conservation easement on that?
No, there isn't.
I actually happen to know that might be part of the HOA for this neighborhood, maybe? No, maybe think of a
This
different
one?
part.
This one's owned by the town.
Okay,
It abuts HOA stuff from 3 different HOAs.
Yeah,
I
this-
didn't worry.
This one is also owned by the town. It was deeded to the town from this HOA.
so it sounds like we should follow up with Melinda, look at the local,
And sorry, I haven't really.
oh, no, we.
She's talking about,
Taking
I
over.
think the land, actually, I thought it went over into here. It's interesting.
We can do that follow-up, but just in general, we wanna highlight, we're gonna look at this. These are the ones we've already identified. If there's specific feedback and guidance about any parcel in particular, we're happy to hear that. This was just an issue of oversight and correction at
So
this point.
we're pretty sure that the soccer fields are not restricted.
Right, and so because they're also actively being used as soccer fields and probably will continue to be that, we'll leave that as planned growth area.
Yeah,
And with the understanding that those are part of the fabric of that land use category and a part of the
yes. Yeah,
pattern of development.
So you and Melinda, you'll follow up on the stuff around the school and those parcels there. Was there anything to the, like to the right that you
Yeah.
wanted to converse, like you wanted to
I
talk
thought the
about?
Johnson
today?
farm is all conserved and it looks like it all is marked conserved
It
there.
is.
It's on both sides of the interstate.
That's a Vermont Land Trust.
Okay, great.
So that one's accurate to mark it.
Concern, great. So we will stick those in rural conservation and then. Again, we can leave the. Ends on the PGA there, planned growth area, or. Our approach with cemeteries has been to lump them in with whatever land uses around them and adjacent to them.
Yeah,
In this case, it could go either way. If there's no strong feelings, we'll. Probably
Well-
leave it as is, but
the last one marked is the Lewis's. Where Johnson's daughter got the Lewis and the guy that runs the farm now.
Denny.
That's their house, is on that one. So we have a residence, a cemetery, a conserved farm.
So does it make, I'm gonna be misunderstanding, so the pink versus the yellow. Are we talking about where the boundary to the, like how far? Over the boundary to the pink goes and how much
Yeah.
should be yellow?
Yeah,
essentially, yes. And the reason I'm asking is normally we wouldn't really put this to you because we're trying to follow our criteria of mapping areas of the sewer core, or in the sewer service area as planned growth area, 'cause that's what, where the development potential is. But because this is literally an edge case where this is gonna be green, you know, in rural
Yeah.
conservation, there's a cemetery and really just one parcel in question. We're happy to leave it and.
Does it,
Cause,
does it make more sense to have the end of the potential growth area end with the conserved lands?
and that's the other alternative.
Because it's sort of weird to have a conserved part and then have a growth
Mhm.
after it.
And the only real implication of that change would be that that parcel that you were talking, I can't remember who you said it was, but Dennis.
Denny and Kathy was,
Wouldn't be eligible for the tier 1B exemption area, and it wouldn't be eligible for the neighborhood benefits under the community investment program, which is, you know, part of our top tonight.
I can't imagine.
So it would be.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
It feels kind of far out, like it feels far enough outside of the village that. It would be a strange place to put development if we're concentrating it in the village and in the growth center. That being like, well, this is part of it too, like it's not served by the path or the. Anything else that connects the village, it feels a little far
So
outside.
it's got a cemetery and a conserved parcel before you get to any other potential growth. I would take the pink out of everything beyond that, you know, even the house across the street.
Beyond this Johnson
Yeah.
one.
Okay, we can do that. Last topic on the map itself, the base categories. Chapin, you made an excellent point that your house, as an example, is historic, used to be closer to the road, just got moved back. We were following the current state designations and the boundaries that they put in place, and we have to include those by statute.
Yeah.
We do have the ability to expand those areas, and when we talked in February, we didn't really hear a lot of direct feedback about that. So we left it as is. We didn't see a lot of comments from the public about this, but before we put the final finishing touches on this map, we just wanna explore, should any additional part of these parcels or additional parcels be included in your village center. The distinction between village center and planned growth area is relatively minimal from both a tier 1B and a incentives and designation perspective. Tier 1B, they're both eligible. Designation wise, the village centers have more eligibility for historic preservation benefits in terms of tax credits, as well as assistance from agency of powers and community development. Whereas neighborhood or PGA planned growth area would have a little more incentive for housing development essentially. Otherwise, they all have very similar benefits, and that is outlined in one of the attachments I sent you that came out from the state recently. It really is probably more a matter of how it feels to the community and whether it aligns with your planning documents and maps. And knowing that you also just passed some regulations about this area, I just wanted to confirm whether these boundaries still make sense.
I can speak to my land, my 0.97 acres there.
Yes, I think we'll include your speech.
That I'm part of the village zoning district, I'm part of the historic district. And in terms of the benefits, there's no way I would be developing anything, but if I wanted to spend a lot of money on restoration of an 1815 house, it would be nice to be eligible for grants. So I would prefer to be in just for consistency.
Yeah, and we can definitely double check the boundaries of the historic district, not necessarily as mapped by ACCD, but as shown on the historic sites and structures survey, as well as your zoning.
Yeah, and I don't wanna, say this with 100% certainty, but I believe the designated village center boundary at this point is not a regulatory boundary within our zoning. So we've gone to talking about that, yes, we do have a national register district and acknowledge that boundary because there are things we need to do and report on there because we're a certified local government that's administering it. But after that, we go out into the broader village boundary. We have some street frontage designations related to being on Route 2 or not. But mostly we're looking parcel by parcel for whether the parcel contains what we call a contributing structure.
Mhm.
So, you know, when ACCD approved the most recent village center boundary, they wanted to cut some parcels off. They wanted to keep it relatively tight to Route 2. But I don't think that serves any regulatory function anymore.
Mhm.
In Williston, because we've done away with what it used to do, which was that. Boundary called the designated center plus the additional review area.
Okay,
That was pretty close to the village center boundary, so. We shouldn't be in conflict with anything in a regulatory sense if we consider. Including whole parcels that front on Route 2, for example, that contain a historic structure.
Yeah.
Which I think is like literally this one.
No, I think I see another, because I think the historic district goes to the brook, am I right?
No, that,
Because this is the DeWitt house that's,
I'll have to double check.
definitely historic register. I mean, Devitt. What's his name? Devitt, it's, where's here, that's theirs, and then I think this is an old house too, and that is too. So I think there's 3 houses that are in the historic district there that are not included here.
and we can certainly follow the Williston Historic District boundaries and confirm that with staff outside of the city.
I think that would be cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and certainly any properties that would benefit from that historic,
Yeah,
those historic incentives, historic preservation incentives, we would want to make sure we include. We were even considering some of the parcels further out, like
yeah,
on Maple Road, Village Grove, and up to Old Stage Road.
Yep.
And, you know, Slate Barn Drive, just because they do seem very connected to the village center and the village, you know, identity.
Yeah.
It doesn't, again, make a huge difference if they're not historic. Maybe they become historic at some point. Need to take advantage of those credits, but
nothing's historic on. Now on
Right.
those, but and I realize there's some historic homes too past the brook, but I don't know if they're in the registry.
and the brook makes a good boundary of that if we were to try to
Mhm.
expand. I think that one of the things we are considering is when we go to the land use review board, Agency of Commerce and Community Development will take a look at this and make their recommendations on where they think these boundaries should be. They're probably going to advocate strongly to keep it relatively close to what they have in the past, but we're trying to be a little more comprehensive in how we interpret these statutory descriptions, just because, again, some of these, dividing of parcels in half doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Mhm.
So we will touch base with the village district zoning maps and maybe add a few things in. This will come before the select board before we take it to our long range planning committee at the end or in July, so plenty more opportunities to check in and make sure we got it right. We'll also have our regional plan adoption process in the fall, and then next spring, our confirmation with the land use review board, so this is not the end of the road and a good opportunity to kind of check that we put things the way they should be.
It's McHugh Devitt, I remember his name. That's
Great.
that federal style home.
yeah,
Mhm.
So those were the only questions we had on base area boundaries. We do want to transition to talking about tier 1B, and I'm zooming out to show you that all of the areas in dark purple, that magenta village center that we were just talking about, and the pink planned growth area are the areas that are eligible for tier 1B. And they're also the areas eligible for tier 1A. And let's talk a little bit about what those mean. Just to review, tier 1B is a sort of medium level exemption from Act 250. It is specific to housing development, so it allows for the current threshold of 10 units on 10 acres of land or less, or more, which is what triggers Act 250 currently, to be increased to up to 50 units on up to 10 acres. So any project that is below that threshold would now not have to go to Act 250. A larger project still would, but the idea is that in these areas where we've said this is where the town has, put forth, an idea of housing growth and said, we're willing to invest in this and we're ready to regulate to that. And where the regional plan is indicating that too, we don't need that additional Act 250 review. It is specific to housing, so it doesn't apply to commercial development, it does apply to the housing portion of mixed use developments, so. It also does not affect existing Act 250 permits and conditions, so anything that's in place today will still be applicable, but. If there was a change to that, to a property that had an existing permit or condition, it just wouldn't have anything new added to it. Anything that is in existence as far as Act 250 permits and conditions on properties in a Tier 1B area is still the responsibility of the district commission. Town does not take over management of that in Tier 1B. So it really is kind of a free pass for those areas, and just a complete removal of that housing element. Tier 1A is different in that it is saying it's a complete exemption from Act 250 for all development in the area that the town gets approved for. And there's a higher threshold for that because there are a few other criteria that are required for Tier 1B, but they pretty much align with the criteria for our base mapping areas. With Tier 1A, the town also has to have some specific requirements in its zoning. It has to be able to essentially prove administrative capacity to manage development at the level that Act 50 would. And there are a few other small things that we do believe Williston qualifies for. And it's something you've already been discussing in your town plan, so we strongly encourage you to do that. But it would maybe, as Chapin said earlier in the meeting, require a slightly more in-depth look at how to administer those existing Act 250 permits and conditions. To be clear, you're not necessarily becoming Act 250 in Williston. The idea is to delegate review of development to the town and the way the town wants to regulate development, as long as you meet certain criteria.
But we still have to administer existing criteria for existing.
You do not have to administer Act 250 criteria. You have to show that your bylaws meet certain thresholds.
Okay. I thought we actually had to take over.
So what will happen is that those existing permits and conditions need to be incorporated into your own DRB
I
permit.
see.
Okay.
In whatever way ensures that those permits and conditions are continue to be carried forth, or if there is clear that some condition no longer applies, or the reason for that condition being in place no longer matters, you can let that go.
So, and is that up to the town to decide that?
It's
Like,
up to the town to decide that, but you do essentially report to the district
Mm,
commission
and
saying,
they have to
hey,
agree.
this was an existing Act 250 permit, we had a new project, here's how we ruled on it, and here's our permit,
Okay.
and let us know if we messed up.
Okay.
Are you gonna go through the information that you sent over about the Tier 1A versus Tier 1B, or should I ask my questions?
Please ask your questions,
Okay.
I don't need to go through it if you folks have reviewed it and wanna just jump into questions.
Either way, I just didn't want to jump ahead. But I was just curious, like, what are we? So Tier 1A is in our growth center, and we already have task corners form-based code that, handles a lot of the growth management type things, but for the Tier 1B areas, is there anything that we would be like allowing that we currently don't by saying Tier 1B is good here? Like, what are kind of the knock-on effects? Because we'd allow more development, but they would still be subject to our growth management system, like what's?
Correct, so you'd still have local review or local permits, whatever your bylaws say about development in the Tier 1B area is still applicable. In addition, any state permits that are required, such as wetlands, wastewater, stormwater, exactly, are still applicable. So
It's just Act 250.
it's just Act 250 and the things that are specific to Act 250, so
And
usually
it
that means
goes for-
things like traffic, which you also regulate locally, archaeology and historic preservation, which to some extent you regulate locally. Maybe not archaeology, but historic preservation where it matters.
And I think agricultural soils.
And agricultural soils.
So there are things that if an applicant today is subject to Act 250 in these areas that they would encounter, that they might not encounter Otherwise, they wouldn't, so, somebody developing in a meadow in our suburban residential zone today. Who's subject to Act 250 might have to address the fact that they're impacting prime agricultural soils. They might have to pay money. They might have to avoid certain areas. They might have to buy land off-site and put restrictions on it. That would go away. And I guess the question as the town thinks about tier 1B would be. Are there any things that we're really relying on Act 250 to do for the town, or are we okay with the way the town is regulating development? Similarly, someone today who wants to remove a historic structure, a structure that's on the state historic sites and structures list, and they're out in the residential zoning district, they're not in the village. Our zoning does not have any prohibitions on that.
And honestly, Act 250 might not be triggered in that situation.
It might not, just to remove the structure.
Yeah.
We had one occasion where a structure was being removed as part of a development piece of the estates on North Williston Road. Where there was a listed structure on the site and, the applicant had been through all of their town approvals and 95% of their Act 250 approval when, it came to light that this structure was listed and was going, slated to be removed. There was an emergency meeting of the state historic board. A argument over what constituted a quorum because they were meeting by phone and ultimately by one vote, the structure was allowed to be removed. So, backing out of all of that, is Williston experiencing a lot of development where the feeling is, gosh, I'm sure glad Act 250 is there to save those ag soils or to add friction to the process of removing that historic structure? Or is there a comfort level that on those threshold and below threshold projects, it would be okay if that wasn't the case? And I think generally it would. I also think in our town plan, we've identified things like talking about whether we want to start restricting the demolition of historic structures townwide versus just in the village. We have other ways that we address impacts to agricultural soils and open space. It's a policy question for the town. There are some differences, but generally I don't hear a lot of comments to the effect of, thank goodness Act 250 permitting is gonna happen after the local permitting, because, there's all these things that have fallen through the cracks. That's not the general sentiment. What the Act 250 jurisdiction does do, especially if we're talking about the speed at which housing is created, is it has its own timeline. Our local district tends to want to see people almost all of the way through their local review before they apply and get started at Act 250. So it's not two things running concurrently, it's one and then the other. And there are some very odd sort of catch-22s about wastewater permitting that come up with sequencing around that have created some challenges for folks. And it adds complexity, it adds cost, it adds time.
Can I?
And another opportunity for appeal.
And another opportunity for appeal. We definitely have experienced that.
Can I float the working assumption that the pink areas in the village center? We would say we want it to be 1B. The question to me is what we would want to do with Taft Corners. The assumption is it would be 1A. And I was just worried about the liability part of that. But if those were our working assumptions, then our questions could be more like, why wouldn't we do 1B in the pink areas?
And I'll also emphasize in this sort of interim period before the regional plan is adopted and between when our plan is adopted and the town considers applying for tier 1A, you can still include Taft's Corners in tier 1B. You can have it apply to all those areas and then decide you want to take it a step further for Taft's Corners.
Yeah, and I think that would make sense. It does seem that many residential projects in Taft Corners are gonna be over 50 units, but we did just have a 38 unit building that we signed off on. And it was part of a larger project, but you could see those infill buildings that might benefit from that while the town considers its options around 1A.
So we don't have to decide about 1A now.
Correct.
But how do we make a decision though when the time come? are we going to, I don't know, memorandum, I don't know, we're gonna vote or how, what is? Or do we come up with some kind of recommendation and
I would,
educate the people that this is how we're gonna do?
I would ask staff to make a recommendation,
Yeah.
because they, to look, sort of look at what all the implications are,
Yes,
highlight them and
Yeah.
make a recommendation or.
and then we're gonna bring it to the select board and tell them that this is what we are going to do then, right?
Is this, the select board's the body that makes that?
Yeah.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so for tier 1B, definitely we are looking for you to make a recommendation to your select board, because we ultimately want that legislative body decision. The same would be true for tier 1A, but the only difference is that in tier 1B, you're asking the regional planning commission to include it on our map and as a request to the land use review board. With tier 1A, you are directly asking the land use review board.
Yeah, it's like a whole application, right?
Yeah, and they have yet to clarify the exact process, but there's some things in statute that basically say there's a pre-application meeting, there's a 30-day, advance notice and hearing, and then they consider whether you've met the criteria, plus a $250 application fee, I think, something like that.
Okay.
So, Hannah, do you wanna just ask if there's any objections to saying we recommend 1B for the picture ladies? All of them.
I have questions, I think.
Please ask them.
I'm curious, I think maybe I'm coming from the reverse standpoint where I'd be like, sure, in Taft's Corners, I feel really confident we could recommend tier 1A, but I feel less certain that we're covered, like, are we covered in all the ways that we want to by recommending tier B right now, or tier 1B right now?
So what I would think about if I was making this decision is first, what kind of projects are exempt? And what kind aren't, and particularly the 50-unit threshold. So projects like Glazer.
They still have to go through.
Would still go through. Correct me if I'm wrong on this one, I think Summerfield would go through.
Well, it would
Under
go
the
through,
permanent.
only it
Okay.
has secured an exemption as a prior.
Yeah, if it was
If it was not.
proposed in the future.
Right, yeah.
But those are projects with over 100 units each. Projects that have fewer than 50, what those tend to look like in Williston are generally more like 20 or 15 unit projects.
And they go through our standard process. There were a couple there were like 3 different things in the memo you sent that you were looking for us to give recommendations on. Do you wanna go through them? And then we can say if we make the move forward to the select board and make that recommendation, or
Sure.
what's
Yeah.
most useful?
And I do want to clarify one thing you mentioned, Matt, about Glazer, and I'm not familiar with Summerfield, but I'm assuming it's over 10 acres to start with. Both of those would still have triggered Act 250, even with the tier 1B exemption because of that 10-acre threshold.
Yeah.
So these large residential subdivision projects, I
Yeah,
think
boy,
would still
Summerfield.
trigger.
okay.
Summerfield might be.
Might be.
Summerfield's like 17.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it's really talking about really dense.
part that they're.
Dense,
They're
from the
breaking
Act
it off
4.
on the rest, and it's that much.
It's
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
large, so
Mhm.
that's the other thing to think about, if 10 acres is a piece of that threshold.
No implication.
We're really talking about infill
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah, infill
Um,
projects, incremental development, probably in areas that are already, built out or close to it and adjacent to something that's already built out.
And, right, and for those, like it kind of doesn't really make sense for them to go through Act 250,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
And even for something like Glazer or Summerfield, Glazer went through your specific plan process, I mean, that's even higher level of review than
Yeah.
Act 250 might provide.
Right.
So I think Williston certainly has those mechanisms in place for majority of projects that might happen.
Mhm.
So back to your suggestion of going through those recommendations.
At least that seemed like the action item you wanted out of us tonight.
Yes, in terms of tier 1B, we're looking, that's the only action item we really need. The feedback on the map was super helpful. We can spend a minute talking about housing targets if you want, but the only other thing I want to mention, sorry, Chapin.
No, I just wanna say I have one thing to go back to on the map before we're done, but
Yeah.
let's hold it.
Cool. In the map that I shared, which I will pull back up just so we can all see it. there was an area that we have put into planned growth area
Yeah,
around the global
yeah.
boundaries industrial zoning district east. As you have it zoned that would be eligible for tier 1B, but in conversations with staff, sounds like you wouldn't necessarily want that to be an area that is planned for housing and would have Act 50 exemptions for housing there. To clarify, the reason we have put this in planned growth areas because we're trying to be consistent across the region with something in statute that says we can't have an enterprise area, which is what we otherwise would have classified this as,
Right.
adjacent to a planned growth area. And in Williston, we could probably get away with it, except that Global Foundries on the other side of the river in Essex Junction is adjacent to a planned growth area, so that we'd be classifying their two halves of their property. differently. So we are hoping that at some point statute changes or the land use review board says it's okay to have enterprise areas adjacent to planned growth areas. It doesn't happen too often, but it has come up in Chittenden County for sure and across the state. So
I wonder why they have that provision.
since Charlie's been on record saying it, it was his fault to put the language in there, not thinking through the implications. And no one thought through that until the bill was passed.
No.
And we all regret it.
Functionally, what does it mean for that area?
So what you could do is say, you would like to request tier 1B status for all eligible areas except that industrial zoning district east for Williston, or however you want to word it. Or you could continue having the exemption there. It's not in the current interim exemption area, so you'd be expanding, that area of exemption of non-jurisdiction, but it would only matter if there were a project 10 acres or less,
Mhm.
50 units or more, or sorry, 10 to 50 units.
Which is really,
Unlikely.
The irony of that area is that it's industrial use and zoning. I may not be saying that right, but it also is wildlife corridors and deer wintering habitat. And so it's really strange to think of it as either.
I mean, arguably, residential use would have a greater impact on wildlife.
Yeah, but although they're putting a lot of fencing for the solar farm. But yeah,
Megan, you're online. Do you have any questions or comments about anything we've talked about or concerns about tier 1B or?
No, thank you so much for calling it out, calling on me. No, I'm just following along, really interested to hear about these different designations and the possibilities. I've totally been in agreement with all of the decisions that have been made, or the sort of preferences that have evolved here so far. So yeah, so I think it looks fine. No particular questions about this particular parcel that we're discussing now. So I'm good. Thank
Cool,
you.
just wanted to check. So we don't have to make a decision to bring this forward to select board until we see definitive recommendation from the staff? Or do we want to do that at this meeting and then?
we want to
We
do
want to
tier
move
1B
forward.
at this meeting, and tier 1A, we would ask for recommendations for the Taft Corners district.
And we have a lot of time to think about it. here.
Okay,
So tier 1B, we are being asked to decide tonight if we can.
okay, so then you gotta call for the vote.
Yeah.
And we do have a motion in that memo, if you want me to bring that up.
Yeah, that would be great.
Back to Zoom.
I'd be willing to make that motion, and I would just say the reason I would be willing to make it is I believe that the negative effects are minor. And that the positive effect might be helping with our housing.
For the future, right, for the future.
Yes, because all of our existing zoning rules would be followed. It's a matter of not also having a secondary process for projects under 50.
Would any of the staff or Darren, would you be able to catastrophize for me and say, this is the, if we approve this, like, this is the worst case scenario of something that happens in something that's tier 1B now? It's really just about removing Act 250.
It's truly all this is about.
Okay.
It is about being able to provide an incentive for housing development and remove barriers to housing development for those infill and incremental development projects in areas where we've already said this is where housing should go. So I guess the worst case scenario is we have applied that to an area where we said, oh, well, maybe that wasn't exactly where we wanted a medium-sized housing project to go, or gosh, as Matt said, there were some ag soils that should have been mitigated, or a historic
Right.
site that should have been addressed, or some archaeological sites that we missed. That's your really worst case scenario.
And
I'm not saying that those are
and it have to
nothing,
be-
but relatively those are what we're talking about.
Yeah. And they have to be over, under 10 acres.
Correct, 10 acres or
right.
less.
Mhm.
So the amount of catastrophe, it was limited to 10 acres of catastrophe.
Is there a motion? Or is there any further discussion we wanna have first? I know you have to, usually we do things backwards here. Any further discussion on the matter? Or is there a motion?
I'll move to recommend to the select board that they request tier 1B status for all eligible areas in the regional future land use map in Williston. And you're recommending that, I'm fine with that, except the area corresponding to Williston's industrial zone district east, which is the global foundries area.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
Second for Mickey, all in favor?
I,
Aye. And that's everyone.
Great.
can we go back to the map for a second? I have a
Yeah.
conservation.
And just to quick wrap up on tier 1B, we'll be going to the select board on June 17th. It'd be great to have someone from the planning commission, when we're there, just say, we made this motion and here's why, and we talked about it. We'll be talking with them about all the stuff we talked about tonight, but really focusing on that tier 1B. Great, Jacob.
The Jacob Krantz property is conserved and wasn't marked as conserved.
It's not technically conserved.
It's not technically conserved.
It's owned by the town,
It's owned by the town. That was deeded to the town with restrictions.
not,
No? Okay.
not formally,
Oh, okay.
Handshake agreement,
what's that?
handshake agreement.
And,
It was kind of a handshake agreement.
and we're talking about administering it, managing it with the Winooski Park District.
Right.
Is this the one where the fire station is, or?
No.
Okay.
So if you want to pull up the map, I'll show you
Yeah.
where it is, and so maybe if it's yellow, it's probably okay. But we probably don't want it purple. I
Yeah,
think it is yellow, but I think it's that little bit there. It's this.
yeah, it's yellow.
Yeah,
Which is rural general.
okay,
Yeah.
so we okay with that then? I was expecting to see it marked as conserved, but I was ahead of the, I guess I'm ahead of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it could be maybe in the future, but.
One thing that I forgot to mention is that we will have a new symbology on here that shows flood hazard areas and river corridors in a crosshatch. So this is what the map will actually look like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good,
Acknowledging that in most areas, it's already in our rural conservation category, but there are a few spots in plant growth areas, village areas and centers that we want to show that's there, even if the underlying district or zone or land use category is more growth oriented.
Mhm.
So that helps a little bit, this one.
Yep.
I'm gonna say I have one more question about the map too. So it looks like, I'm looking at all the parcels, it looks like the big ones that are kind of to the north of all of the other developments that are already happening, those are planned developments already. And existing permitting, things like that, south of 89, where we have the park and ride. And the Vermont State Police and Hurricane Lane. We know that's a weird area in our zoning already. Is there anything about like, are there any other gaps in our zoning that are here in particular that we would be concerned about? Like, I wouldn't, like, it doesn't really make sense to put a large housing project here anyways, so I guess there's not a concern. But do you have any, I guess my question is, do you have any concerns, knowing that this is a weird area in our zoning, including it in tier 1B?
No, one thing I'll mention in the draft town plan, that appendage that extends to the south, up the hill from Hurricane Lane.
Yeah.
We have slated that to
Oh,
be
yeah.
returned to the ag rural zoning district and ag rural designation.
Mhm.
It was, a boundary that was adjusted under the approval of a specific plan back in 2007 that never came to fruition.
Gotcha.
So the only non-ag rural use that's allowed there is this one very specific office building that was conceptualized, in 2007 and didn't happen. So we might want to take that out. And then on a little more directly to your question, we do allow residential uses in this district. There's a fair amount of density. There's a little bit of kind of odd discussion in the current zoning about, worker housing, because there's a sort of quasi manufacturing, warehousing, industrial use there, but it's mostly travel services.
And who knows, maybe someday the Sonesta will
Could turn into,
affordable.
Yeah.
housing.
I don't think we miss anything by having it tier 1B.
And is it in sewer service, I think?
Yes,
And we're clear in our town plan, we're not gonna expand sewer service, so.
Yes.
Those purple parts make sense. And not beyond.
I think so, yeah.
We did actually have some discussion with staff when we were doing the initial map about the parcels on the east side of 2A, south of Hurricane Lane, but
Yeah.
we determined even though those have water and sewer service, it's more consistent to keep them in rural general as part of the development pattern, so.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that the finger that's going out to the solar
Yeah.
field may change. I guess the question is, do you want us to wait until that's become official with the town? Should we take it out now? Okay.
You should take it out now. Can I amend my motion to say in that?
So that's a separate motion, we don't need to make a motion,
Yeah.
but we'll take it out. Great. Okay. It is 8 o'clock, so I have not upheld my promise of keeping this as short as possible, but before I close this topic, let me turn it back over to you. Did you have any questions or thoughts about the housing targets that CCRPC put out for Williston and the rest of the county?
Oh, good, I'm glad you have another hour.
So Darren, on May 20th, this group discussed a draft memo, which I then walked over to the select board.
Yes.
And they finalized and sent in, I hope.
Who did it get sent into? I guess.
I'll double check with the town manager,
We're
but
worried about sewer capacity long range.
Maybe it did.
It's, yeah.
yeah, so for everybody here, if anybody missed any of this, the main thrust was that, reaching both the mid and high targets for Williston, very likely runs into capacity issues at the Essex plant. And you might get pretty close to the mid target with a really singular focus on only selling new sewer capacity to housing and only in the growth center, but that's not, the world we're in. There's also a call out in that memo to other forms of infrastructure that the town would need to be able to build, roads, support for transit, et cetera. The continuing need to have access to fiscal tools like tax increment financing to make those things happen. And just, some recognition that both the mid and high targets take the town, significantly over what's been its historic average, which because you gave us the numbers. And that there could be some headwinds around that.
But we're not hit as hard as some other towns.
Yeah,
And those other towns that are harder hit asked for it, so.
yeah. So it's,
And when I say that, they literally said, please give us more target, not that we punish them by giving them more.
but the greatest takeaway is understanding the timeframe that likely would exist around a true expansion of treatment capacity.
Mhm.
If we want to aspire to those higher targets, we need to start, a multi-jurisdictional, and we said probably countywide plan to look at wastewater treatment capacity and permit capacity, in order for Chittenden County as a whole, including Williston, to meet, the mid or high targets.
Mhm.
So just, strong support for that effort should it come to be.
Great.
It shouldn't be us only though, right?
Well, that's
You
the
see,
point.
yeah,
Yep, and so something that we've heard from almost every community about housing targets, from Underhill, Westford, and Charlotte to Williston, South Burlington, is we are happy to work on meeting these targets, but we're going to need state assistance to make that happen, specifically when it comes to infrastructure.
Yeah.
So everyone is rowing in the same direction on that, and that's part of why this process got started, was taking a hard look at our housing needs across the state and dialing that down to Chittenden County and saying, what would it actually look like to achieve those targets and meet the needs that we've identified, and trying to align those with the investments and the regulatory environment to make that happen. So
one thing that we could do though is that I have this conversation we met a few years ago. About private and public so-called operation type of stuff, because my office is also looking into renewing this wastewater treatment, stuff. We have our capacity also going to be reached and aging, so we're looking some kind of stuff, so probably, if it is at the county level, started to look around and see what other organizations are looking at. And then see whether it's got some share arrangement, or I don't know, whatever it is, then, or it makes sense, right? Because instead of having two new wastewater treatment in the county versus one big one, then it might work also with some. Let's think about that kind of stuff.
yeah. Justice, we've been thinking about that even before all this got started.
It's not in the transmittal that we drafted, or that Matt drafted in this, like, what they're saying, but I have raised and Shayla had disagreed some.
Yeah.
The fact that we historically have a lot of resistance to growth in Williston,
Yes.
and resentment that we're having to hire more police and fire to take care of people, and feeling that the taxes are going up because we're allowing more housing. So it's a lot of the just people don't like to see change. But I felt we should highlight that there will be resistance to grow, the low target is pretty much in keeping with where we thought we were headed. And I think that that's a level that where it's gonna be accepted. Upping the target it'll seem like there's always development going on, and we will get pushback and resentment.
Yeah.
Shayla, I don't wanna say my part again without saying Shayla's part. Her response was she felt like through the 2050 town plan engagement process, people were more attuned with the need for more housing. And that we won't have as much resistance as we have had in the past.
And it's important to again highlight, why are we even having this conversation about a need for more housing? It's that we've historically underproduced for the level of demand and the level of, other economic development and growth that we've seen. So this isn't necessarily about trying to just, do more housing for the sake of more housing. It's really addressing, the fact that there's a lot of homelessness, the fact that regular folks can't find housing that they should be able to afford in the place that they want. It's close to where they work, so that they're not spending a lot of money commuting from outside of the county. And then also addressing the healthy growth of our communities in a long-term, demographic way. And thinking about the ability to retain workforce, which is part of why taxes are the way they are. So yeah, it's a really complex conversation, and we're throwing that out as well as trying to do all this land use policy change. So it's been interesting to put all those into the mixing pot and see what folks come up with.
And Williston has somewhat successfully said we want both. We're gonna keep the rural areas rural, and we're gonna focus development in areas that were rural at one time, but that we let go to be development.
But we never look at the capacity, right, to say if we were to achieve this mid-level target or high-level target with existing growth area, could we accommodate?
Yes, the staff did look at that. There is plenty of space to have
Or
that
stay
amount of
within the
housing.
growth area? Okay, so then it's.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
which means it's still doable.
The space was okay. It was roads and
Wastewater.
wastewater and also stormwater, hopefully having stormwater, not parcel by parcel, so. 'cause
So
that's
then what
wasteful.
we need is just a commercial interest to develop. To get there, that's like somebody
Yeah.
really have a deep pocket to
Yes.
say, yeah, I'm gonna do this, right? Cause their ability to sell is also another problem, and because
As we talked about in the last meetings, like the amount of the amount of projects that are like have been approved but not built would get us
Yeah.
like a large way to this percentage. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but
Yeah. Items.
yeah. Excellent.
Okay,
Thanks for great discussion and attention to detail.
And you know, there's an interesting corollary to this, which is we know from development progress worldwide. Sewage treatment is the primary limitation on growth. And so if we add more sewage treatment to this area, we will get more growth. If we don't, we won't. And then we have to deal with different problems. If we don't get the growth, we have to deal with the problem of not enough housing and so forth. But if we do get the growth, we have to deal with more traffic, more, all of those. So there's not like an obvious answer, but the answer for CCRPC, in my opinion, is that it is a regional problem, and if regionally we want more growth, sewer is the way to do it.
either come up with some sort of technological advancement to do better than where we are today, like more efficient, without doing anything with some higher capacity or some kind of, I don't know, whatever, right? There has
The
to be.
good thing is that our sewage treatment is getting better and better, and if the way it was 20 years ago, we couldn't add much more of that discharge or start affecting the lake badly.
Yeah.
I feel like technology is, you're also starting to get technology for microplastics and medications and stuff that
Increases our ability.
technology increasing our ability to increase our
Throughput.
wastewater treatment.
Yeah.
Without adversely affecting the environment.
We will be hopefully looking at that in the future, once we stop spending a lot of our attention on doing this regional map update, the next step will be implementation, just like you do in your town plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now we'll leave you to the rest of your agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
for having me.
all the questions.
Yeah, and hope to see at least one of you then on the 17th with select board
Thank you for being on point.
or staff. whatever.
We'll find somebody.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Excellent.
We didn't vote on our minutes.
Yep, that's what I was gonna say. We just gotta go back to the minutes. We can look at the little changes and then we'll get a motion and.
Sure, let me share,
Is that the last topic on the agenda?
yeah.
Awesome,
Okay.
Look at us.
very efficient.
What board was Karen from? Karen Peterson that was on.
CCRPC, right?
Yes, the board of the Chittenden County Regional Planning
Oh,
Commission.
is she our current rep?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, last
It
time.
was Andy Watts.
Yeah.
He stepped down. We haven't nominated a
Yeah,
new board rep and or alternative.
okay, good.
Okay, so.
That's your chance.
Was that?
Now's your chance. Yeah.
How many more words can we be on? How much more involved can you
I've
be?
gotten off of the Green Mountain Transit Board completely. I'm no longer even an alternate.
But the only thing is that the
Alright.
public name is the only one that we're missing, right? That you don't have a name for, or you updated with the name later.
I'll add it in there.
Okay.
All right.
You could at least type in one instead of none.
Yeah, okay, I will do that right now.
Melinda, didn't you look at, I thought you had seen his name and he signed in.
I did, and I just need to, I can't remember his name, and I just need to locate the sheet so that we can write his name.
Got it.
Okay. Well, do we have a motion to
Oh.
accept the minutes with the change that is incoming with the correction?
I'll move, we accept the minutes of May 20th as amended. And with one pending change listing the public person who was here.
Excellent. Do we
Could
have
I
a
just
second?
ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, I had technical difficulties when you were discussing the minutes before. And could you just scroll down so I can see the other
Sure.
pieces? Okay, so we were in the library, I wasn't losing my mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, okay, thank you all, that's perfect.
Excellent. Do we have a second?
I don't know, Megan had to do that.
Megan, you
Yeah.
second?
Sure.
All in favor?
I,
Aye. Oh, that's everyone. Awesome. Meeting, do we need a motion to adjourn? We just called.
No.
Meeting adjourned.
wow.
There you go.
Wow.
Nice to see everyone, bye.
Yeah,
See you, Megan.
bye.
Wait,